Hey, folks, and welcome to not only a brand spanking new episode of Unfinished Business Television. I am your host, Jeff Gallishaw. Noticed without a hat this week, trying something new because we're trying something new with these episodes. Not as much news. Some of you are cheering, some of you are booing. But by the time you get to this, we've noticed most of you probably have heard the news and are like, okay, whatever. Can I get to the review? So we're granting your wish. We're going to give you some news and then some reviews. But I am, again, Jeff Gallishaw, your host, Unfinished B2 on social media. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Andre Joseph of AJ Epics Productions, not television.
Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Yes. So first of all, let's just get briefly to the news. We have Joaquin Phoenix quitting Todd Haynes' film like a couple of days before it was supposed to film. And then we find out that he has a history of doing this with a lot of his big films. Like when he started Napoleon, 10 days before they were supposed to shoot, he demanded that Paul Thomas Anderson come in and work on the script, which is kind of a weird, request. I mean, I love Paul Thomas Anderson, but it's like, oh, this historical, biography film. Let's call in a guy who doesn't know that much about history, at least publicly, Paul Thomas Anderson. But he's going to get to the heart of the character of somebody he probably mostly knows through history. We also find out that he has done this in the past, even with his major movie that got him the Oscar, The Joker, and Come On, another independent film. Now, I can understand this behavior when you're doing a big budget, especially when you're trying to get more money. But when you're the lifeline of an independent film, it's just very strange. And especially with this Todd Haynes project, which was more LGBTQ in nature, was going to have, sex scenes and I'm sure a gay romance. But, this isn't the first film. Queer with Daniel Craig has this, but he also came up with the idea for the film and then he drops out, which was really strange. Andre, have you ever heard stories like this of anybody else like this?
Yeah, me when I was in fourth grade for a Spanish play, and they changed my idea, so I locked myself in the bathroom. But that's a whole different time and whole different personal issue. Yeah, I mean, we've heard stories of temperamental behavior with actors, and trying to play hardball. Some people that, even in television, even the big stars, when they want to get like a big salary increase and they don't get it, they decide they're not going to show up for the first few days until negotiations finally come to a head. So, I mean, in that sense, it's nothing new. But when it comes to Joaquin Phoenix, here's a guy with a history of all kinds of strange behavior that ultimately leads to a documentary where it turns out the whole thing was kind of staged for him. Um, he's just a trippy dude. That's really what I think it comes down to. I don't think some people want to say, well, maybe he's just anti-gay and doesn't want to play a gay character, but I don't think that's the issue at all. I just think it's simply, something that must not be clicking with him. Maybe he was like inspired by the project, and then something happened along the way when you bring in certain creatives that try to reshape it into something else. And when that person feels like it's not what I signed on for, then they start to get a little temperamental, or maybe they're just not happy with the overall direction. I know recently when they did the Joker 2 screening at Cannes and they did the usual standing ovation, he walked out before the ovation. So who knows how he really feels about the Joker sequel coming out. Yeah, he's a trippy dude. I really can't explain his behavior at all, other than he comes from a family that's very bohemian, and we know their history pretty well. So this is not surprising. This is Joaquin Phoenix. This is what you see is what you get.
But it feels like he's filling out sort of the stereotype of the temperamental actor, sort of like Edward Norton and Birdman. It's just, I mean, it's not that strange, but I guess for it to come out like when this independent film is really ready to be made, and again, you kind of wrote the story for it, and now you're like, no, I will not be doing it. So it'll be interesting, like what his next project will be, and will they even insure him? When you're like so willy nilly to walk out, because it's not like you're walking out for a moral reason, like, oh, I refuse to play or celebrate this racist or evil character. It's just like he walked away, no explanation really, and leaving them in a lurch because they can't find somebody else to fill the role last minute. And I mean, I know there was rumor they tried to get Pedro Pascal, but obviously he's going to be tied up for a bit. So it's just a shame, because is it going to be like a movie will eventually review a Rebel Ridge situation where it's like, okay, we're going to have to shut down production and try to build this project again with a different actor, and hopefully we can get the funding? Or will they, I guess, patch things up and what's his name, guarantee that he will actually show up and be on set and not, pull any shenanigans? Or is this just, you know what? I've got an Oscar. I'll always work.
I think that's the latter. He's got the Oscar. They're going to keep throwing scripts at him, and it's just really a roll of the dice. Unless you have like a really tough director that could cut down on his shit, and there's only very few that could do that. Maybe James Gray, maybe Paul Thomas Anderson can do it, but um, other than Joker, I wouldn't even rely on him for a tempole.
Yeah, because I was wondering if maybe it's a trust thing. Because, like you said, he does it like, well, he pulled it with Paul Thomas Anderson, but he never pulled it, for instance, on James Gray, who he's worked with numerous times. And I don't know if Ridley Scott, at his age, I mean, he already has only probably a few more movies in him, if he's going to be like, you know what, I want to work with that difficult cat, Joaquin Phoenix, because it doesn't appear like this is a Klaus Kinski, Werner Herzog situation where it's just like, oh, I hate him with every fiber of my being, but look at those performances, So.
Well, does he have a history of bipolar disorder or any kind of issues? Because I know one story was when he worked on Walk the Line playing Johnny Cash, he was shooting a scene and he started having PTSD about his brother River's death. And that kind of like shut down production for a day or two. So who knows if this guy, like, you know, we've heard these sorts of Mariah Carey and, even sometimes with Martin Lawrence, they can, flip on a switch very quickly because they have these issues that don't get really taken seriously in the media.
Well, I can understand the walk the line, situation where, you know, one of the major things or psychology of the character is he's living in his brother's shadow,
Right.
who died at a young age. So I can understand that. But, these other films, I'm like, what was like, other than the script, what was the problem with Napoleon? What was the problem with Come On, and unassuming little drama, that a lot of people don't even know about that movie. What's the problem with Inherent Vice, other than maybe truly trying to understand what the hell's going on half the time? I mean, I remember when he came out of his retirement after, the mockumentary that he made, I'm Still Here, where there were rumors he was going to play the Sam Rockwell part in The Sitter with Jonah Hill, as a kind of a comeback role, which would have been interesting, but also seemed kind of lowly for him at that stage in his career, because this was even after, he had just gotten nominated a few years before for Best Actor for Walk the Line. So, well, I guess we'll see what happens in the future, especially with, I'm sure, the press tour for the Joker Part 2 coming.
Can't wait.
Yeah, maybe this is all tied into that marketing. Next story. Justine Bateman made a statement that I think a lot of creative people in Hollywood are feeling, in that studios need to stop making or depending on IP sequels so much, or these projects that are like reboots of things we've already seen and were successful in their time, but now we are getting, just repeat after repeat. Like, hey, I appreciate all the Batman movies. I don't need them so close together. Let me miss the character. Just because you recast it or has a new director's vision doesn't mean, oh, it's changed so much. It's just a difference in presentation. It's just like if I put out Will and Grace and it was successful for all these years and everybody loves it, let me reboot it, but let me do it at a different angle with different creators and writers. It's still the same show. I mean, for every The Connors, there's a Murphy Brown reboot. And with these movies, I sort of agree. Like, I can't say because I haven't seen it yet, but now we have this new film where we're going to talk about the trailer later of Speak No Evil. Now, of course, I've seen the original, which is readily available online and streaming, not like illegal. And it is a great thriller, but there's one reason why it works because the way the film is made is so dependent on the culture of the country that it comes from. And now we have this American remake. And again, I can't talk about the quality because it might be a great movie, but something is a little bit lost in translation, when you make an American film. And now it seems like it's just more your typical thriller, secret psycho film. And so that's a rather extreme because, we always remake foreign films hoping, oh, the original audience didn't see it. These Americans won't. They'll see it if I put a big name in it. But also, I think this really stems. I know we always make them out to be the villain. It's a little bit of Disney fault because we got so used to as kids all these like spin-off straight to home video movies of sequels to our favorite, like Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, but see, here was the key demographic. They kept it as a Disney original or just on video cassette. None of these reached theaters. And now we have these studios being like, you know what? Live action Lion King. And now we even have the spinoff, we're going to talk about later, but rest in peace, James Earl Jones, Mufasa story, where it was just like, that's okay. Now, it worked, at least for me, with Cruella, because that wasn't really a sequel. That was an origin story that was in that universe, but I'm not getting 101 Dalmatians Part 4, And it was so unique for its time. I mean, I wish I would have seen it in theaters. It was towards the pandemic's end, so I just wasn't willing to take that risk. But look, it had so much originality, new characters, and we finally get kind of a sympathetic Cruella de Vil that made us look at, Emma Stone as an actress in a different way than the romantic comedies at the time she had always been playing. But that film had something to say. No offense, even though Barry Jenkins made it, I haven't seen it, but I just doubt Mustafa is going to make me look at the Lion King like, wow, it's even more powerful now. What are your feelings on this subject?
Well, this conversation reminds me we do need to talk about that Snow White trailer because I got some thoughts on that shit. I feel she's 100% right. And I can tell you from personal experience. We're going to talk about Beetlejuice at some point. And to me, when I look at this year where we've gotten a new Ghostbusters, a new Beetlejuice, basically the return of the Fox X-Men movies for Deadpool, Wolverine, we have a new Beverly Hills Cop, a new Bad Boys. It's like you're getting, for our generation, all the sequels that we were waiting 20, 35 years, sometimes even 40 years to have happen. And we've also had the retreads of classic properties that we grew up on with new actors and new filmmakers and trying to do modernized takes or to take a continuation of a franchise, but let's give it a modern edge, and let's maybe have a female lead or a lead of color instead of, you know, the traditional white male or female type of leading character, which kind of goes to something that Jenna Ortega was talking about. And we could kind of tie that into this conversation. But essentially, for me personally, after Beetlejuice, I feel like there's nothing else I really want to see when it comes to old IPs. You know, we've exhausted Star Wars. It'll continue to make money because you still have generations of fans that will see those movies, but the merchandise isn't flying like it once did. The zeitgeist that it had when we were growing up is really not the same as it was then. And at the same time, you look at Marvel and their complete misdirections, where now their bulletproof formula is starting to crack. And what I feel is, because these studios are hurting as a result of everybody trying to do a streaming platform and not doing as well as Netflix did, you find that they're becoming more desperate to get returns. And that means more reliance on established IPs that will guarantee butts and seats. I'll guarantee ancillary products are going to be sold. And by doing that, you're diluting this industry that was so built on taking chances every now and then, and for every generation to have its own trend, its own thing to really get into. You know, we were gifted in the 80s to have all the Spielberg produced movies, all the Simpson and Bruckheimer and Joel Silver movies. And then in the 90s, you know, Tarantino, Kevin Smith, guys that were defining that moment, giving voice to that generation. And then when you look at the 2000s, that's where I think we're starting to get to where we are now. But we didn't have Lord of the Rings movies seriously until that point. We didn't have The Matrix, and then The Matrix came along. And those things were also part of that generation. We keep going back, and these people now that are growing up don't have a whole lot to identify with unless it's on streaming most of the time. When it comes to theaters, it's just let's regurgitate the same old shit. But yet, where are those middle of the road movies? Where are those films that people can relate to? And unfortunately, they don't take as many chances unless it's on streaming. And, you know, theaters are hurting so much that they need these big IPs to sell tickets on opening weekend. So really, I don't think Justin Bateman is totally wrong here. I think it's really getting pretty bad to where if all we're doing is just going back to the same old properties where you're remaking them, rebooting them, or doing a legacy sequel, you know, where's the innovation? Where's the new stuff? And then when you do something new, you're barely doing enough in the marketing to really push it for today's audience. So I think this is an industry that's still trying to figure out what does the modern audience want now, and I don't think they have the answers yet.
Well, I think again, it's the problem that we're getting more businessmen like David Zaslav
Yeah,
would rather write off original content and but another Batman movie, sure. But this, even though it is an IP thing, like Coyote versus Acme, an actual Looney Tunes movie, and you guys are just like, we'll write it for release it. But it's interesting because this is getting a little bigger than what we said, because I always felt like that Jennifer Lawrence movie that came out last year, the comedy, that should have had a bigger audience as a mid-sized risk-taking comedy. And I was amazed it made it to theaters, because also, even when you look at the star-studded films, they're going straight to streaming. And I'm kind of happy because you see the quality. But, back in the day, let's say a movie like The Union with Holly Berry and Marky Mark, despite whatever quality it had, that would have made it to theaters in the old day and been an event movie practically, just for the movie stars who were in it. But, they also would have given maybe the bigger names in the supporting cast more to do, like J.K. Simmons, But we'll get into that when we review it. But, this is another thing. Like, remember when release dates meant something? Nothing was going to get leaked before that. Before the internet, of course, you didn't get like, oh, here's the report from its sneak preview or anything. All you had to go on was word of mouth, And I'm not blaming the internet, but it just feels like even when it comes to music now, release dates don't mean anything if I release half the album as singles before the release date. So by the time I get to the album, it's like I've heard most of it already. I'm not excited as much as I used to be. And with the closing of all these, like, let's say media places like The Wiz or Sam Goody, where are these people supposed to promote? Where am I supposed to meet, let's say, I don't know, if a Lady Gaga promoting her latest album, I can't get to her at a concert. And I'm not going to buy a VIP pass just to meet her, So what? I'm supposed to just write on her like Instagram and hope she responds. Is that my new autograph? And it's the same thing with films. It's like, unless you go to a screening, and with some movie theaters disappearing, so unless you're part of a movie club where you can go to an AFI screening, where are you supposed to like really talk to filmmakers and get to know them, or get to know like their vision, if not just interviews? Like, look at how, here's a little peek behind the scenes for you guys. Look at how hard it is for us to get guests, to talk to. It's not like it's easy. It's not like we have that business insider instinct. So I just feel like also a lot of people complain about, oh, well, movies aren't as glamorous. I agree, because it's been sucked dry. There is no like mystery to anything. Like weeks before a movie, most of the stuff will be spoiled, which is why I think a lot of us sometimes like these indie movies, because you hear nothing really before it's released. You might hear, okay, it's good, okay, it's bad, but that's about it. You don't hear, oh, at the end, this is how the movie ends. Like you're getting so much of these days, even by the reviewers, the day the movie comes out. Like you were complaining, I remember, before you saw Deadpool Wolverine. Of course, there were 50 million spoilers, but one of the biggest ones is spoiled right before you go see the movie.
Yeah.
Literally minutes before you see the movie, as an alert or a news story that comes up on your phone. It's like, really? Where is just the magic? There is no water cooler talk about like, hey, did you see like the awards last night, or did you see that episode? Because things like Game of Thrones are spoiled for you the day after. There is no code of ethics when it comes to spoilers, and people rationale it. Oh, well, you should have seen it opening day. It's day 2. Like maybe I had something to do.
And that kind of brings up yes, the media, and when it comes to trying to hype up a project, even not just for film but also for television as well. And I'm guilty. Like I work sort of in that industry for Collider and other sites, writing news stories and features. But one thing that annoys me sometimes is watching these interviews with these celebrities when they're out, doing press tours, and these sugar-coated questions that they ask. Like when we do our show and we bring in a guest like a Jeff Canoe or James Foley, we like to ask them those out-of-the-box questions. Not necessarily like the tough stuff or like, oh, these personal relationships, but just like, the nuts and bolts of what they have to do that often people don't know about, and doing those deep dives. Most of these like mainstream journalists really just come up with fluff questions that don't add any substance, that don't make anything interesting that makes you want to go out and see these films. Case in point, the Presumed Innocent TV series with Jake Gyllenhaal. They did a thing on Extra, I think it was, and at one point they brought up the Harrison Ford Presumed Innocent movie, which I thought, okay, yeah, that should be brought up because that is a hit movie of his back in the day and people remember it. But instead of asking, like, did you take any influence from seeing the movie? Did you ever watch Presumed Innocent? They asked Jake Gyllenhaal, oh, did you talk to Harrison Ford about how to get to Rusty Savage? And like, no, I didn't talk to him at all. We were doing our own thing. Like, you think that Jake Gyllenhaal is going to get Harrison Ford's phone number and say, hey, what was it like playing a lawyer that had to have an affair behind his wife's back? First of all, Harrison Ford's like 80-something years old. He's probably drinking. He doesn't give a shit. He's collecting his paychecks now. But that's like the most idiotic question to ask. I know it's not supposed to be like bad questions, no such thing as that. But it's like, come on, guys. Do your research, do the homework if you're gonna go and do these questions, talking to these people, because it feels like a waste of time when you do that. So, back in the day where you watched the show like Coming Attractions on E, or if you watched Entertainment Tonight and you heard something was coming out and you got hyped up, that made it worthwhile for the wait. Like going, for example, watching Entertainment Tonight in like January of '98, and they show footage of Lethal Weapon 4 being shot. Like, holy shit, Lethal Weapon 4 is coming out. And then now you're waiting for that July release date because you're hyped up. We don't get that now because everything gets so spoiled so quickly. And then these journalists give these fluff questions that don't help anything to get these movies hyped up. And so, yeah, that's the other issue as well, is just the anticipation level, and especially it doesn't help for an original film that needs that kind of publicity to get people out.
Yeah, because I remember how excited I was when like Romeo and Juliet, William Shakespeare's with Leo DiCaprio and Claire Danes came out. And part of that was because you had all these hit songs off the soundtrack that kept giving the film life. Or same thing with The Craft, or a movie we love to cite here, Fear, fueled by Bush. The music group, guys, the music group. um, but that was so exciting. That was like Marky Mark's other big film after being in the Basketball Diaries, or Renaissance Man, like his first big role, And Reese Witherspoon was just starting to make a name for herself. And you don't get films. Are we supposed to feel like that with this new Blake Lively movie that was a hit out of nowhere and similarly had all this controversy? It's like, huh? Like, where did this even come from? But also, just to get back a little bit more on subject, it's sort of like the same thing when we get let's say, Lord of the Rings. Great. You had the 3 movies, and the only other source material you had was The Hobbit. You made those movies. How are we having a television series now? Like, now it's just like you're making shit up, instead of even staying true to the original. And I mean, obviously it's successful, but still, is this really needed before it becomes something like Star Wars, where it just cheapens everything? Whereas I've told you many times, I tried watching The Mandalorian, made it through the first half of the first season, and kind of quit Star Wars, at least new Star Wars stuff, because I'm like, it's oversaturated. I liked wondering, I wonder where that came from. I wonder where that came from. Instead of you now telling me, oh, this is where Boba Fett came from. Here's his full story. And here's the wacky adventures he went on in that. The only one I'm tempted to maybe watch is Andor. And that's because that was one of the few new Star Wars films that I actually really enjoyed, or thought this has potential. But, now with like The Acolyte recently getting canceled, and all these other Star Wars spinoffs, it's like, this is too much. You're telling me too much about a galaxy far, far away, from a long time ago. But I do have to cite Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the series, where you took the original conceit, you didn't make it a reboot. You made it, the creators or showrunners made it their own, so that it explored little ideas and things. Like the first season to me is like exploring any kind of romantic relationship, friendship or romantic relationship, and the different journeys it takes, and obviously in a different fashion, but it brings up those same subjects. Now, if you can do something like that, that makes you rethink what you originally saw, that I will give you credit for bringing it back or rebooting it. But most of the time, it's just more of the same. The only thing that Friday the 13th, when they tried to reboot it, was, oh, now we're going to explain to you how Jason knows where all these victims were. The things you didn't want to know.
Right.
And I feel like that was their way of legitimizing the reboot. Because when they did, was it Nightmare on Elm Street, the only legitimization of it was, well, we've got new special effects, and we have this really crappy looking Freddy Krueger makeup that looks worse than when we originally saw the first one. Because they basically make the version of Jaws that Steven Spielberg probably first envisioned with more of the shark instead of keeping the shark in the shadows because it didn't work. And that's what I felt like with this reboot. I'm like, I'm seeing way too much of Freddy because this makeup is horrible. Whereas in at least A Nightmare on Elm Street, the first film, it was a nightmare because he was lurking in the shadows in the dark. And then when you saw the makeup, you were scared. It was still impressive, but still, at least it was a mystery. And I feel like that's what's missing from cinema: mystery and excitement. And
Yeah, let me put a bookend on this. Going back to what you were saying about those Disney sequels back in the day. I remember when I was in high school and I was going to a field trip for my film club class, and there were these two girls I overheard talking, and they were talking about some of those like Cinderella 2, Aladdin sequels, and all the stuff that they were putting out on video at that time. And they were talking about like, yeah, when we were much younger, we loved when something like, say, The Little Mermaid or Beauty and the Beast just ended, and then you kind of wanted to guess what would happen in the next chapter without seeing it. Just the imagination of what your fan fiction idea would be of continuing those stories. But now when you do actually see them produce this stuff, it's not the same. It takes something special away. And that's 100% accurate. Because now when you look at, as you mentioned, with Star Wars, or even now, like with Dexter, supposed to be the prequel series, and then maybe a potential another sequel series coming out. It's like all we're really doing is, yes, we're searching for more money, but we're also taking away what made those franchises so special by trying to constantly find every little hole, every little subplot to say, can we spin off this character? Can we go into this backstory to see how this happened, this origin story? And the more you keep doing that, the more that you're not only just saturating the product, or oversaturating the product, but you are also taking away, like you said, the mystery and just the overall, like the imagination that we have for ourselves when we see these movies. You're robbing us of that the more times that you keep having to go down the well.
yeah, it's sort of like when, unfortunately, an author dies and somebody takes over, let's say, their book series. It's like, okay, the books are reach that same quality, but that original spark and voice is gone. And
Yeah.
And that's what it feels like. Because now it just feels like a bunch of people who have, I guess, writing degrees and probably were on these forums writing their fan fiction and now have studio deals and like, haha, I know my idea is the best of how to reboot this. Or, I mean, no insult to any of you screenwriters out there, or they're like Max Landis's, where they're like, okay, so I'm going to make Frankenstein, but I'm going to make Igor the star of it. And first things first, we're going to make him hunky and take out that hump. It's like, well, then it's not Frankenstein, And that's what it feels like a lot of these reboots are like, well, we're going to say it's in this universe, but it's really an original script. And we just tie this character to this one and tie this one to that. And, and it doesn't feel like anything new for the audience. It just feels like, okay, so this feels like, it's sort of like, no offense to the movie or Michael Mann, but it's like how Heat was originally LA Takedown. So Heat is just basically a bigger budgeted, maybe better written, and indulgent more than that was. But essentially, each could have been like really an episode of Miami Vice in of itself. Maybe a two-parter, maybe even a three-parter. But essentially, it's the same thing. And that's what it feels like going to the movies. Now for people like me and you, we go to movies and like, okay, let's write down how what the influences are throughout this film. Like, okay, that was inspired by this movie. This was inspired by that movie. This was inspired by this movie. It's like sampling, but you're not making anything artistic with it, And that is, I know there's only like basically 5 or 7 major plots in any story, but still, people knew how to dress it up a little better or make it a character piece. Today, what's a fucking character piece? Thor Part 1? I'm like, that's what goes. I mean, this is a subject we can talk endlessly about. Is there anything you'd like to just like put out there as your final stamp on?
Uh, just support original movies. Simple as that.
Boom! There you go. Now we're not at the reviews yet, folks. We do unfortunately have to talk about a great, legendary, iconic actor who passed away. James Earl Jones passed away this week. And, you know, obviously everybody knows him as Darth Vader. Come on. Every Star Wars project, he was getting that check or, had to come into the booth and do a voice. But, I mean, looking over his resume, I'm reminded of how many great films he was in, not only growing up, but even before me and you were born. I mean, okay, I'll mention a movie. Feel free to interrupt me if you have any memories, particularly of these movies. The man worked with Stanley Kubrick in Doctor Strange. He worked with Diane Carroll in The Hood, or African American classic, Claudine with Diane Carroll. He was in The Great White Hope, where he was Oscar nominated for playing a boxer and one of the first interracial relationships on the big screen. Another legendary role, Conan the Barbarian,
Also
Thulsa
Doom.
Doom.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, come on. I even remember the effect where they made him turn into the snake to this day as one of the weirdest practical effects I've ever seen in a movie. Or for some people, the good Conan movie.
Yeah.
Coming to America, of course. And of course, he had a cameo in Coming to America, too. A piece of the action, one of Bill Cosby and Sidney Poitier's buddy comedies. I remember that one. They used to play it all the time on Flicks. Unfortunately, he was also, not unfortunately, he worked. The thing is, listening while I go through this resume, this man constantly stayed working. He is the example of a consummate working actor because even though Oscar nominated, Broadway, television, he never, even though later in life, obviously, he more played himself, but the whole thing was he always kept working and never acted like he was too good to be in whatever the project was. I guess as long as he believed in it or got to play a different character. I mean, Soul Man. He was in Soul Man. He played Malcolm X in The Greatest, the movie about Muhammad Ali. That starred Muhammad Ali. The Lion King. I mean, come on. We just discussed, his character in that film. Meteor Man, where he had the high top fade wig.
Yeah.
And he's like, asking girls, you down with OPP? Come on. That's like a great role. And he's throwing fucking records to defend against the gang. One of my favorite little roles of his, The Ambulance with Eric Roberts, where he plays the detective. And spoiler alert, when his character dies, he's still chewing gum with his last breath.
Also working with the best of the best.
Yes. Well, I was going to save that for the last. But I was going to say, just like that movie, or the movie he started, he was the best of the best. Yes, another Eric Roberts movie. Where is Eric Roberts, quote online about the passing of it? Bingo, Long Traveling All-Stars with Richard Pryor, Billy D. Williams. One of my favorite, John Badham directed that. Another person he worked with a lot, Clear and Present Danger, Harrison Ford in the classic Jack Ryan series of movies, because he was also in Patriot Games.
And The Hunt for October. He was the thread to connect all of them.
Exactly. He was always good at playing like CIA heads, because he did the same thing in Sneakers in his little bit role in that movie. He was even in True Identity when Lenny Clark, British comedian, Lenny Clark tried to make his American debut in a film, and that was who he wanted to be. He wanted to be a classic actor like James Earl Jones, who then appeared in a cameo. And I'm like, he was that type of actor. Like I said, even if it was a small project, if he believed in the vision or the character, he would go out of his way and actually appear. Oh, I'm not done, folks. Summersby, where he played a black judge in the 1800s. You could have made a movie just about that. Instead of the Jodie Foster Richard Gere movie we got. He was in Field of Dreams, another classic, baseball, and The Sandlot, part 1 and 2. He's the thread that kept that story going. Other than Specs, who was in part 2. It's sad that I know that about The Sandlot part 2. But we have Gimme Shelter, a movie with Brendan Fraser and now of course her name escapes me.
Vanessa Hudgens.
Vanessa Hudgens. I'll admit, I'm more watching for Vanessa Hudgens, but then I got James Earl Jones was in it with Brendan Fraser and Rosario Dawson with hideously yellow teeth. He was in a Tupac movie, gang related. He was in Good Luck with Gregory Hines and Vincent D'Onofrio as two disabled buddies going on a fishing trip. I actually saw that movie. And guess what? That made it to theaters. That would have definitely been a streamer now.
What was the one where he was brothers with Robert Duvall?
Oh, that is an underrated gem that I think if anybody wants to see a great James Earl Jones movie that they haven't seen, they've seen all these, watch that movie where, yeah, they're like half brothers and Irma P. Hall plays the grandmother. And does James Earl Jones have a stutter in that movie?
He might have. I haven't seen it in a long time.
Because I know that's why he started acting. Drama was a way to get over his stutter in childhood. So, that was another thing, that I found like amazing and gracious about the man. Under One Roof, that was a television series that only lasted one season, but was critically acclaimed that I love that he started. He was in Jefferson in Paris, a Merchant Ivory movie. Clean Slate with Dana Carvey. Hey, we all got to work. And he was in, speaking of best of the best, Excessive Force. The action movie. Come on. Was that Jeff Speakman or was that
that was Thomas Ian Griffith.
Okay, because I remember it was one of them. Sorry, guys. Your big movie careers kind of ran parallel. So I'm like, which one was it? And Three Fugitives with Martin Short and Nick Nolte. But one of the you spoiled mine with bringing up a family thing. But I'm just looking at this resume. I mean, The Simpsons. He voiced The Simpsons too, and a Tony Award winner. This man did it all. This man lived a life. It was a great actor. I always just wished he could have got like a Marlon Brando, The Godfather type role where he was this dangerous guy who you just thought was like a regular everyday businessman. That was the dream role. Like if they ever made a black gangster movie, find out he's the big king, sort of like Bill Duke in that 50 Cent movie, Richard Died Trying, but I'm just there's just so many memories of seeing him in so many movies growing up and usually being shocked he's in the film. And he's an actor I think a lot of us took for granted. And now we're just really realizing wow, he's really a big thread in our movie going, what memories in particular do you have of James Earl Jones? Other than, the Star Wars, the obvious. Or the
Jesus, yeah. There's just so much. I mean, where to start? I mean, you pretty much listed all of them, so I'll try to list the ones that weren't mentioned. But I think anything he did, he elevated. That was the thing. It wasn't just a voice; it was the presence of the man. When he came in, 9 times out of 10, he was a no-nonsense motherfucker. That's basically, James Earl Jones as an actor. He took it as seriously as basically his entire life as a professional actor. And yes, Star Wars, Lion King, Come to America, those are the things that I remember growing up. Later, I would find movies like Claudine and The Great White Hope and really be mesmerized by his performances and just even for like, I would say for some women, very attractive, like especially Conan, the piercing blue eyes they gave him when he first comes and he kills his mother, and it's all pretty much in a close-up shot of him. It's like, the dude was very charismatic in a very subtle way. There were some other things he did. He did a TV movie in the 70s called The Man, where he played the first African American president, which I still have to finish watching, but was very interesting and very distinct because that came out during the Nixon era. So this was long before Barack Obama and trying to depict what it would be like if we had a African American president back in those days. He also did a couple of other TV shows that people don't talk about much. He did a Stephen Bochco series called Paris back in 1979, where he was a police captain who moonlighted as a college professor. It only lasted one season, but it also served as the catalyst for Hill Street Blues because it combined the police element with the personal life, which most TV shows, cop shows in particular, weren't doing before Hill Street came along. And I also remember he did an episode of LA Law that was kind of a big deal because this is when the show really started to take off. And when he showed up in that as a judge that was kind of bending the law a bit, that was like really showing this show's legit. Like major stars like that being on that show really gave it some credibility. Also, not forget the voice of CNN. This is CNN. You heard that all for our lives anytime you watch CNN before it became kind of tabloidish these days. And obviously, with Star Wars, even as a kid, I always kept thinking to myself, I can't see anybody else take over this guy's voice when he passes on. There's just no way. Even watching Rogue One and recently with Obi-Wan Kenobi, I love that they not only kept his voice, but how they were able to, on that show, towards the end, blend it with Hayden Christensen when he has the cracked helmet. That was like a holy shit moment that I think if there was any highlight of Disney Star Wars, it was that of anything else that they ever did that unfortunately hasn't made Star Wars so great these days. One thing we also didn't mention too was that 2 years before he passed, and I wrote a piece on this when I worked for CBR, he signed off to have his voice get cloned in AI. So from here on out, long after he's gone, his voice will remain Darth Vader unless, some legal issue comes up. But his estate has the okay to use his voice for any future appearances of Darth Vader in a Star Wars project. So he will live on, even if he's not here in physical form. But no doubt, you look at that body of work in film, television, and on stage. Let's not forget Fences. I mean, that was a seminal, my God, like one of the greatest Broadway plays ever produced, and maybe the touchstone of his entire career. That more people, if you can find any broadcast on YouTube of it, definitely check out the original Fences because that was a tour de force performance by James Earl Jones. And he's not only going to be missed, but I think his influence is all over Black cinema, Black actors that we have today, like Denzel Washington, Lawrence Fishburne, and countless other actors that we have now. And I think more of us need to really pay attention to this man's body of work because he really, just he he exemplifies what it means to be present in the moment and to have that sort of gravitas that made the difference between a good movie and a bad movie.
I totally agree. So rest in peace to James Earl Jones. And also rest in peace to Chad McQueen, who passed away. Was it yesterday?
Yeah, yesterday.
Yes, many of you might remember him as one of Johnny's crew in the original Karate Kid. Yes, he was Cobra Kai Do or Die. He appeared in many other productions, but unfortunately I don't remember many of them. But he was in that legendary film, and rest in peace to that gentleman. So from that, we go on to the reviews, and I could have started off with a different film, but considering we just talked about a great actress passing away, let's start off with light type. So we're going to talk about the horror movie Torn Hearts from 2022, directed by Brea Grant. This movie starring Katie Seagal as a country music star who was, country music legend with her sister, who unfortunately passed away. So when two young up and coming country artists get a chance to meet her and try to sell her on collaborating on a song, she jumps at the chance, but she might have a more wicked plan at heart for and fate for these two ladies. Especially, this is a single location for the most part thriller. This movie, and now this came out during. This was one of those big titles that like came out straight to home video, or I think it played a week in theaters before coming out. And this was like still while Katie Seagal had that resurgence from Sons of Anarchy and was finally like getting a big screen role. And this is a nice little thriller film. I really actually quite enjoyed it, but I think that's because I didn't go into it with much, like excitement. I thought, okay, this will be typical. It'll be okay. And it's actually a tight little thriller. I enjoyed the cast. I enjoyed the two young ladies who played the country stars. They were both memorable in their own ways in their performances. And it's directed by Brea Grant, who's an actress. Also, some of you might remember her from the movie The Stylist, and also Heroes. No, was it Heroes the series? Was she on that?
I don't know.
I know she played a role on Friday Night Lights, the series. I remember her in that, but this was like one of her. It's not her directorial debut. She's directed a few films, and this film, like I said, it's a nice little thriller. It's worth checking out. I don't know where it's streaming. Probably Tubi or Hulu. It's a thriller. Is it wrong to use the word cute for a thriller? Because it's like, I mean, you've seen this all before. It does offer a few surprises, but it's not a film where you're just like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? But it's a tight little film. I would recommend it if anybody asked me about it. How did you feel about Torn Hearts?
Well, it's been a while since I watched it, but from what I do remember, I was impressed by Katie Seagal in this because it was obvious that you're going to have a scenario where these two country stars are going to go into this mansion and you think, oh, yeah, they're going to meet their idol. No, something sinister is obviously going to go down. But what I liked was that I think her character had a lot of humility, being somebody that, had the star moment, then it kind of faded away, and now she's kind of gone off the deep end. But you still like you feel bad ultimately when she gets her comeuppance, and you feel that maybe she's a little justified in what she needs to do here. And I think the overall film is a tour de force for Kay Seagal as not Peggy Bundy, but actually like an opportunity for her to show, yes, she could do drama. Yes, she could play evil. And we forget she's a really good singer. I mean, she used to back up Bette Midler back in the day and even did the end theme to the movie Loose Cannons, which I don't know how that came about, but that'll be its own deep dive someday. But she is really fantastic in this. It really is a star vehicle for her. And yeah, based on what I do remember of it, I do give it a recommendation. I think it's a movie worth checking out.
Yeah, I really wish this script had come along maybe when she was still playing Peggy Bundy, like Christina Applegate has her Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. This could have been like her big screen like thriller where people would have been like, wow, she does have range. So that maybe once Married with Children went off the air, she would have gotten maybe a few more offers to be in different things. you know.
And she is
And
still very attractive.
yes, and I like that one of the other characters who you feel sorry for ends up being like ultimately the biggest villain of the whole movie. And I also want to give Abby Quinn a shout out, who is more built in this film as at first a sidekick and almost seems like she's going to be the final girl in this movie. She gives a great performance that I think is right on par with Katie Seagal, and both of them should be working more out there. So I just want to say that about Torn Hearts. So obviously, we say, guys, check this one out. We both recommend it. Next, we have 2003 or last year's, like, oh, 2003 was so long ago. Rustin, directed by George C. Wolfe and starring Coleman Domingo as a civil rights leader, Rustin, and you know, who has been left out a lot of Black history, being the fact that he was a homosexual and out. And this is written by Dustin Lance Black and Julian Brees. And this film is it's almost, even though I know Andre hates this film, it's like Biker Boys. Every working Black actor is in this movie, at least in a cameo or in a major role. You've got obviously Coleman Domingo in the lead. You've got Glenn Turman, who's always in George C. Wolfe's movies. You have Chris Rock. You have CCH Pounder in this film, who you haven't seen in a while. Audra McDonald, Jeffrey Wright, you know, and it doesn't shy away from gay love scenes. And I have to say, when this film was being planned, I thought, cool, this is going to be like, you know, the movie, the Black movie of the year. And of course, then they dumped it on Netflix. And it was just like, now I can see why it's dumped on Netflix. It's not a bad movie. It's just very underwhelming for the subject it's tackling. It almost feels like, no offense to, I love I'm using this term a lot. No offense to Mario Van Peebles. It kind of feels like Posse's story of the Black Panthers. You know, like this should be way more exciting, but it just feels like, I mean, Coleman Domingo does a great performance in the lead, and he totally deserves his Best Actor nomination that he got for this film. But I mean, as the story goes along, it's like, hey, there was Black history made while he was like sleeping with some like a married preacher, and while they were trying to, I guess, kind of kill the association between him and Martin Luther King, so it wouldn't make it look like, oh, Martin Luther King approved of gay lifestyles, or you know, his fight with other leaders in the civil rights movement while putting together the March on Washington. And, you know, and Audra McDonald playing, you know, the wife of this preacher. I just feel like they had to bone up the role for her to play, you know, because that's the only way you're going to get Audra McDonald to be in this movie. And how some of the biggest leaders of the civil rights, you know, civil rights program were women and homosexuals, you know, CCH Pounder, her character is really the person who puts this plan all together. So it's sort of like what you were talking about with James Earl Jones with Paris. You have here, we're going to talk about the political stuff, but we're going to get more into the personal life of this character. And I just wish it had been a little bit more vivid, because it's sort of like that movie Shirley with Regina King, where it just feels like it's a good movie, great performances, but it plays flat because it feels like somehow the Netflix visual concept of making everything look bland or like a sitcom or a TV movie affects the visual of the film. It just looks so basic. There's no visual flourishes. There's no atmosphere, you know? It's almost like, you know, when you go see a play, how sometimes the performances, even though it's a limited space, it plays so big. Unfortunately, that would be if this was a play. But watching Rustin, I'm constantly reminded, oh, we're in this bland, you know, kind of background. It doesn't come alive as it should. And what did you think of a Rust? And
I don't remember really hating the movie. I think it was pretty much like you said. It's like the performances are there, and Coleman Domingo is excellent and worthy of that Oscar nomination. But besides the fact that they wanted to focus on his homosexuality and how it was affecting his relationships with civil rights leaders, it doesn't really pop. It doesn't have a certain intensity to make it really engaging. And I think that's really more about maybe it was almost as if they were trying to adapt a stage play as opposed to doing like a theatrical film, and it needed somebody with more of a visual eye and somebody that could give it more of a cinematic feel than just like a made for TV movie kind of approach. So that's probably where the film falls flat, but I don't think it's a terrible movie. I would give it a mild recommendation, because I think it's still worthy for its performances and obviously for the history to know that part of that backstory of the civil rights movement that rarely ever gets discussed. But could have been more visually exciting. Yeah, absolutely. There could have been some improvements, but I don't think it's horrible.
I don't think it's horrible. I just found it just very disappointing, considering, the subject matter and the size and scope of the film. Ultimately, I agree with you. I'll give it a mild recommendation, but I can't sit here and say, "Oh, it was so great." Run out and go see it.
Yeah.
But if you're a fan of Coleman Domingo, I would say definitely go see it in one of his first leading roles, especially where he's not a villain. So next we have Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, the sequel to the reboot of Ghostbusters. This time we find Paul Rudd, Carrie Coon, Finn Wolfhard, and McKenna Grace, all now working as Ghostbusters in Manhattan. And this film finds a way to bring back all their friends from Middle America and face a new villain, a fire demon. It took me a while to see this movie, and now I can see why. Now, again, I like the nostalgia of the last reboot, but this one again felt more of a money grab. It has its moments that are sweet and cute and prove this is more for children, but there's a lot of stuff where it's just like, this is ridiculous. Like, okay, we're gonna take our most enthusiastic character, played by McKenna Grace, and then we're gonna sideline her from ghostbusting through most of the film so she can bond with a moody, like, ghost girl who we find out, spoiler, is gonna kind of portray her a bit in the end, but then redeem herself. And then we have like Finn Wolfhard as character who seems there to still be have a crush on that other black girl character. And also, hey, all my scenes are going to be dealing with Slimer for the most part. Paul Rudd and Carrie Coon, I feel like the screenwriters barely remember they're in the movie. And then, Ernie Hudson, majorly sidelined. Dan Aykroyd appears, but again, majorly sidelined. And then Bill Murray just seemed like he was coming there because there was good food on the set. But again, he's not really used for anything new or different, and that's the problem. All the original Ghostbusters really are just there to be like, hey, we're here. We tie into the plot, but we don't have anything to do. Annie Potts, she's here. We get to see her suit up. Not used very much, And then wherever that Dutch guy who's supposed to be a scientist with them. And I'm like, how many fucking people are on this team? And who's paying? How's the paychecks going around? And how are you a Ghostbuster? Don't you have high school to go to? Little things like that I know are like nitpicky, but and then you have a villain who would basically be a character of the week on the Ghostbusters cartoon. Watching, not that memorable. And I mean, it's great. Hey, Patton Oswalt's in it. Great. And Camille Najjar, who ends up playing a major character and has a character arc you would expect. But that's not enough to make this film exciting. For me, I could see this being more of a streaming version of, if you were going to make this sequel. It did not need to be in theater. And I know it's Gil Keenan, who is Jason Reitman's writing partner now. And Jason Reitman, of course, helped write the script. But it just felt like maybe this needed another go round, or even maybe you should go to maybe more of a genre writer to come up with a better story, at least for this film. So I have to say, I'm not going to recommend this. Sorry, I was that disappointed, But keep in mind, even with the reboot, I was on 50-50 fence. So, obviously not my Ghostbusters. But Andre, what did you think of Ghostbusters for Frozen Empire?
Well, I'm the expert in Ghostbusters, so I'll give the honest opinion. There's a split that I have in which, as a fan, I actually enjoyed it. As a casual moviegoer, I could see the problems. So here's what I think does work. I like that they go back to New York just to see how they're going to operate. I like that they tried to expand beyond just the firehouse. You had that second location where they're actually now trying to study the ghosts, as opposed to just, okay, we're going to just contain them and that's that. Like, no, now they're actually trying to figure things out with them and developing new technology. So they do try to expand the lore just a little bit. I like that we have a new villain as opposed to going back to the well with Gozer, or even the rumor at one point that they're going to bring back Vigo. No, I'm glad. New villain, new mythology, just something else. Yes, they did take influence from the cartoon. You could see that all throughout. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I also will say that the whole thing with the Phoebe character and Melody, the dead girl, didn't bother me. I know there were people that were like, oh, they made her gay and, she's in love with a female ghost. I was like, I don't give a shit. She's kind of like on that spectrum anyway, but because McKenna Grace is so likable as that character, it was like, I'm fine with it. I could go with this. And I get what they're trying to do here. So I think on those merits, I don't think it's as terrible as everybody tries to make it out to be. And there are points where they do pull back from the Easter eggs, and then at other times they still continue to double down on them. So there is that split. Where I think it has a problem, and you're definitely right on a couple of things. There are way too many characters in this. I like James Acaster, by the way. I thought he was the highlight as the scientist working in the second lab, and has a couple of really cool moments that I think he's just hilarious. And I would want, if they continue, I want to see more of him. But they tried way too hard to try to fit everybody into this. Now we're trying to establish that the core group is the Spengler family and Paul Rudd, but then trying to find these half-assed ways to explain how we have podcasts, how we have the Black Girl Lucky in there, and both are just vastly underwritten, along with Finn Wolfhard, who is even more underwritten than he was in the last movie. 100% agree that they didn't need every one of these characters back. They could have pulled some people aside. And then when it came to the OGs, Bill Murray didn't have to be in there. He clearly was just collecting a check. And I think he's friends with Gil Keenan. So it was like, yeah, I like the kid. So let me just show up for a few scenes and have my booze and then I'll go home. And I was disappointed with Annie Potts that they made all that hype around her being in a jumpsuit and she's going to have her own proton pack. And she does nothing other than help to close the container at the end with the guys. That was kind of a waste. Yeah, Ernie Hudson's just there just to kind of like keep a lid on things. I don't think Dan Aykroyd was wasted, though. I do feel he had a point of like he still wanted to be in the action, but they have to constantly remind him, no, you're the old guy. You can't do this anymore. And that's where I think there was one slight, this is going to be controversial to say, but it felt like they were setting his character up to die. And I don't know if there was an alternate version where he was supposed to bite the dust at the end, because I actually thought the way it was going, where like you see him in the store, the Ecto-1's passing by, he's getting kind of emotional, or the scene with Ernie Hudson where he's talking about the golden years, like, this is how I want to spend my golden years. I thought at the end, when things were looking really dire and they're struggling to get the containment unit closed, that with all those icicles popping in and out, that he was going to get stabbed and die. And then you'd see his funeral and he would be a ghost with Egon. And they weren't brave enough to take that chance. Now, as a fan growing up with it, I was like, okay, great, nobody dies. But I'm also kind of like, that would have actually punctuated and been a nice closing of his arc as a Ghostbuster. But they still need to make their money. And even with William Atherton coming back as Walter Peck, now being the mayor of New York, I'm like, did we have like a bad year where the crime rate was up and this guy got elected mayor? Because I don't know. I was kind of mixed on that. So yeah, I gotta say, and this is probably the other problem I'll mention, and then I'll close it off. But Afterlife felt like an event because you had to wait so long after Ghostbusters 2 to see how they were going to progress the story, especially after the Paul Feig movie just decided to be a straight up reboot. But here, I don't think the story was strong enough to be a continuation. It just felt like an episode of a TV show, like the cartoon, as you mentioned, rather than being like something that was major. Like, okay, yeah, the world's about to go frozen and there's going to be a new ice age. I'd never really felt that because you had all these isolated incidents, and only in the third act does it suddenly get really dire, but not dire to the point of like how they had that epic buildup in the first movie, or when they basically tried to repeat the same formula in two with the slime covering all over Manhattan. Like those things felt like, holy shit, the end of the world's coming. I didn't feel that here. And there wasn't any like thing additional to make it an event. It didn't need Sigourney Weaver, didn't need Rick Moranis. It wouldn't have made the movie any better. It just would have added to the problem with way too many characters. So on that note, I would say as a fan, I don't think it's terrible. I think you can enjoy it as another companion piece to the series. But yeah, it's very flawed overall. And if they were to make another movie, personally, I think they should just go to television route at this point. But if they were to make another movie, cut down on the cast, take it out in New York City, and really pull back those Easter eggs and just tell a new story, new technology, new ghosts, and progress this thing forward. Because if you're only going to continue to cater to people like me, you're not going to continue to see returns. You're just going to get only the hardcore fans coming out and not building on generating new fans.
Yes, remember that, Kevin Smith. But also, my problem was William Atherton's character has lived through both one and two, and still is trying to say there's no such thing as ghosts. It's like, what are you, the intellectual version of Trump? There's no climate change, despite all this evidence. So I felt like that felt a little false. Like, could you think of another new thing for him? Just saying maybe they're the ones like releasing ghosts at least, and just like, like an exterminator, like, oh, I'm going to release all the stuff into your house, and then I'm going to supposedly take it out. That would have been a little bit more believable than his, oh no, they're still charlatans. There's no such thing as ghosts. When you saw the fucking Stay Puft Marshmallow Man at the end of what?
Hell, you got smothered with marshmallow.
Exactly. And now this is a nitpick. I understand what truly shows that this is for kids. All these little mini Stay Puft Marshmallow Men. They've become the minions of this franchise. And it's fucking annoying. I'm sorry. I don't have kids, so I can say that. If I had kids, I'd be like, nah, they're cute.
And the mid-credit scene was very pointless with them.
Exactly. I think they were just following a trend. Like, hey, all the other big budget movies have a mid-credit scene. Let's do this. So I'm sorry. I can't recommend it personally. I mean, if you have kids, sure. But for me, I'm just like, I guess I'm that old cranky guy. Give me my originals. I do not want to see these reboots. Next, let's talk about an original. Jackpot, starring John Cena and Aquafina. I don't think it was supposed to rhyme. But this is the latest film, surprisingly directed by Paul Feig. I usually his films actually make it to theaters, but I guess after his Ghostbusters adventure, they're like, nah, you got to earn it back. And this film follows Aquafina character who is like a new transplant to Los Angeles who finds out that she's won the lottery. But here's the trick: if you win the lottery, anybody who kills you over the next 24 hours gets this lottery. And because this is set in the near future in Los Angeles. So John Cena offers his services as a bodyguard to get her, to the next day. And we watch as various characters, some she knows, and many random try to kill her throughout the day as her and John Cena bond. In this movie, where it feels like, well, Hulu has John Cena and Aquafina both under contract. So they were like, let's put them in a movie together and make it kind of a not romantic comedy, but a comedy. And since they have to have one film a year released by Hulu, this was it. I will say though, this could have made it to theaters and could have been something, because I liked it more than I expected to. It's still not good, but it's enjoyable. But I think that's because more of the action and comedic sequences are kind of inspired and actually work as action and comedy. Unlike, like, let's say that Kevin Hart, Woody Harrelson movie, this actually works. And I still stand by my opinion that you can tell where John Cena's character is supposed to go or be by whatever hairstyle he has in the movie. Because again, he's goofy with a dark past in this film. And I mean, I liked it. I especially liked Sean William Scott's cameo in the beginning. I personally think he should work more, but that might just be me. And sadly, Dolly De Leon, who got an Oscar nomination last year, I believe for Triangle of Sadness as Best Supporting Actress, has a bit role in this movie that is like, she's gonna be getting better roles than this. Come on. But I mean, and does every youth comedy have to have a Machine Gun Kelly cameo somewhere in this? The one thing I kind of did like, I liked the throwback to Freaks and Geeks, Paul Feig having Becky Ann Baker play a pivotal character in this movie. I'd like seeing Stanley from The Office actually have something to do in a movie. And Simo Liu finally got a job, a good one, kind of playing a supporting character and, not, one of the Kens in Barbie or co-starring in an unfortunate Jennifer Lopez. So I was happy to see him. I wish he would get bigger and better roles, but he was fun here. And ultimately, like I said, I give it a mild recommendation. It's like Quiz Lady with Aquafina and Sandra Oh is a little bit better than this movie. But if you're just looking for something stupid and entertaining, I say give this film a chance. But what did you think of Jackpot? And
I didn't like it. I mean, I think Aquafina is
wow.
funnier. I think she's funnier in other movies. I mean, here they did try to like get her to rely more on physical comedy and still her quips. Cena, he's doing like the goofy peacemaker thing, and they try to make him like an overgrown child at points. It is surprisingly violent at points, that's for sure. I just feel like I've seen this before, the same deal of like somebody who's kind of mild mannered being on the hunt, basically being hunted by all these random people. It could have easily been a Crank movie, if you had the same directors, but made it more violent and had Jason Statham thrown in. I feel like that's what Paul Feig was watching when he was putting this movie together. But yeah, I just nothing really impressed me about it. So yeah, I don't recommend it.
That would have been interesting if they would have given it to the directors of Crank to make. Then I would have loved it, considering I am an outspoken champion of those movies. I'm sorry, I love them. Maybe that's why I kind of give this one a mild recommendation. It kind of is in that league, though not nearly as violent as that movie. Fucked up. So, but like I said, I say, even though Andre and like I give it a mild recommendation, I say if you ain't got nothing better to watch, give it a chance. It's better than some of the other streaming movies out there, especially considering the talent involved. I just feel like Aquafina still is kind of trying to find her niche. Because she can do drama. She's good at comedy, but is she more of a physical comedy person or, more comedy acting? Because considering she started out more as kind of a like stereotypical comedic rapper, so it's like she never did like the stand up, route. So we don't really know like where her humor is officially based, really. But she is talented, and I hope she goes on to bigger and better than this one. Next, well, speaking of death and downers, we take a look at Gary, the documentary on Gary Coleman, directed by Robin Dashwood, where we take a look at the life and times of Gary Coleman and discover, unfortunately, he never really had too many people in his corner. And the ones that he did, unfortunately, he kind of pushed to the side for some new people who did not have his best interest in at heart or really even thinking about him. His adoptive parents included, and I'm sorry, his wife fucking murdered. I'm sorry. I know that this is supposed to be a review, but I'm not seeing much evidence that shows she had nothing to do with his death. So, and she's such a piece of shit. And we have to sit through like half the movie with her commenting that I'm just like, yeah, I'm sorry, no. But I mean, if you're interested, I feel like this is something made to appeal to people our age, because I don't know if this next generation really knows that much about Diff'rent Strokes other than the jokes. They didn't really take the series, I guess, somewhat seriously, or at least remember how popular the series was at the time and how big a star Gary Coleman was once, at the time with all these TV movies. I mean, I was a fan. I loved Diff'rent Strokes until Sam came along. I loved his little TV movies. I remember him being on Facts of Life and Good Times, and unfortunately, all the roles he had to take that were kind of spoofs of himself, like when he was on 227 playing a gangster with Iman as his gangster mall. When he was on, obviously, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And what was that other thing?
He was on Married with Children.
Yeah, when he cameoed on it. They even
And The Simpsons.
When he did the voice, and they kind of made fun of his arrest as a security guard.
Yeah.
I find it interesting, and I only know this because I watched the E! True Hollywood Story too, that his manager was a professional Michael Jackson impersonator later in life, not like initially. But strangely, that seemed to be the closest friend he really had in his life who actually cared about him, other than the woman he had a relationship with before he met this demon that he eventually married. I mean, watching the documentary, though, it reminded me of the Donna Summer documentary where it was like, damn, were there ever any good times? Like where everything was just so tragic. And, his parents kind of act like, oh, we were doing what was in the best interest of Gary, when basically he just seemed to be a meal ticket for it, I will admit I was kind of interested to see this weird movie that he shot in Utah as one of his last film works, I just feel like, unfortunately, like how Todd Bridges could kind of make fun of like everything that came before in his life. And I feel like that's why he's continuously working on in whatever thing. I think that Gary Coleman needed that. But I think he took the Diff'rent Strokes so seriously that anything making fun of it, he'll do it for a paycheck, but it still rubbed him the wrong way and was sore, because they even showed like when he basically decked the woman who asked him for an autograph. And, I guess they couldn't get the Judge Judy footage when they were both on there. But, it just makes you kind of feel sorry for him. And, like maybe if he had lived, there was maybe a chance he could have, I'm not going to say come back, but maybe gotten through his trauma and, would have made like a killing on all these autograph shows there are now, going around. But unfortunately, he didn't get a chance to because, I mean, come on, you say you care about him, but you took a selfie and sold it to the tabloids. That's just. Mm. Andre, what did you feel about the Gary Coleman documentary?
So with Gary, like you, I grew up watching Diff'rent Strokes, but only in repeats a few years after it ended. So I used to watch it every day after school, and yeah, I was a fan, and unfortunately, like a lot of people, it did take on kind of a darker meaning as the years went on, and he had his problems. Todd Bridges has problems. Data Plato with her problems that ultimately led to her unfortunate tragedy. And maybe just a show being a little bit out of date because of rich white guy taking up black kids living in his house. So it definitely is sometimes uncomfortable to watch now when you look at it. But what I think about the documentary is I don't think it's bad. I mean, I think most of it I already knew. I knew about all the
Mm-hmm.
issues with the agents and the parents taking advantage of him. Though I will say, I think the way that it came across, I did feel a little bit of sympathy for his parents, more so his mother than his father, because they were not showbiz people. They were just, middle America folks, black folks who had a very talented son, didn't know anything about how the industry worked. They just saw, okay, all this money was coming in, and, rather than trying to actually save his money, they were spending it like it wasn't going to go away. And that's kind of like the sugar coated mentality that especially for black artists in music, in film and television have, which is you sign that contract and you think, okay, now you've made it. You're going to be all over the place. You're going to be getting money coming in every week. And then it just either stops or it just disappears out of nowhere and you don't know why, because there were things in that contract that you didn't really look at. So I can't say that I was like, oh my God, fuck his parents because they screwed him over. They didn't know better. That's really what that came down to. Um, I didn't know about some of the pilots they shot for him after Diff'rent Strokes ended, that they were trying to make
Neither did I.
attempts. Yeah, those attempts, like a detective show they were trying to do with him, and it didn't get off the ground. And that's a shame. I mean, that at least the Family Channel gave Mr. T his own show after the A Team ended. They could have done something with Gary Coleman that would have been a little out of the box for him. Maybe even play up the fact that he had the kidney issue and couldn't grow past a certain point. I should also mention too that I have seen Gary Coleman in person 2 years before he passed away. I was at New York Comic Con in 2007. He was signing autographs, and I had considered meeting him and getting his autograph. The only reason why I didn't was because he didn't look well at that time, and he looked kind of angry. I know there were people that did get their autograph signed. They said he was cordial, but he didn't look happy at all. And knowing how things would ultimately end, clearly there were definitely things going on in his life at that time. Maybe he wasn't getting his dialysis that day, and that may have been affecting his mood. Who knows? But I didn't know he was constantly having to, go and get these operations done like on a regular basis, well into the end of his life. And 100%, that bitch killed him. I mean, down to the fact that this guy was lying in the hospital in the last moments of his life, and you're going to take a selfie and sell it to the tabloids? Fuck this woman, okay? They should reopen that case and prove that she was the cause of his death. It was no accident. He didn't just like get up in the middle of the night and fall down a flight of steps because maybe he was trying to get a drink of water. No, something happened. There was an altercation. She killed him, and they couldn't prove it for whatever reason, because I guess they're in a state or a township that has maybe a very piss poor police force. I would have a federal investigation and charge that woman today. So I think I can't really recommend a documentary because, like I said, it didn't really say anything new that we didn't already know that each Hollywood story
Mm-hmm.
had done, or what biography had done. But I think it really should reopen that investigation and put that bitch in prison. Put her in the gas chamber for what she did. Because how fucking dare you exploit this young man before his death? Fuck that woman.
Yeah, and I mean, first of all, I don't know, maybe I heard it wrong, but when it happened at the time, didn't they always mention like he had fallen off a ladder and not down the stairs? And
I don't recall if it was a ladder, but I know there was like a documentary you could find on Tubi that kind of reenacted his death, and it was clearly a flight of steps.
okay. And I mean, my thing is also when she's sitting there, he had fallen. Oh, there's so much blood. Oh, I don't want
Yeah,
to
what
get
the fuck?
traumatized. You know,
That's
if that's
like,
somebody,
yeah, you would be
if
in a
it's
fucking panic, but this woman's just like so stoic, like she's Scott Peterson. What the fuck?
exactly like if it's somebody you love and they just fell down the stairs and there's so much blood, you're gonna want to try and stop it, hold them something. And she's like, I don't want to touch it. Oh, so much blood. I don't want to get any of it on me. Like, then that's somebody you love, you know? And so I'm just like, no, she was guilty.
Yeah, she was in
So
it for the money. She wanted whatever money he had left, and basically was like a blood sucking vampire.
I guess he didn't work. And then she's always making him sign all these things. Yet she claims she didn't know who he was when she met him. And I'm like, it's Utah. There are not many celebrities come through. So, and I imagine that plays on their televisions constantly. But I will say, I still watch different shows. I have no problem. Come on. The bicycle episode alone, where
Yeah,
he just hold left Dudley.
and early Janet
Anyway,
Jackson.
true. And I mean, some highlights of Todd Bridges' career, man. And back when he was still like kind of tough, before Willis kind of ultimately became, I guess, kind of suburbanized, you know.
And I
And
will say, Todd Bridges is a very sweet man.
he comes across that way.
Yeah,
He's literally one of the last survivors of the show. You know, you still have Pearl and you still have Sam, but Sam doesn't ever give any interviews. So
yeah. But he's a big advocate for troubled child actors, so I got to give him props to for him to turn his life around to try to help others.
true. And for our final review, I mean, by now most of you have seen it, so obviously there are going to be plenty of spoilers in this. We talk about Deadpool and Wolverine. Yeah, I liked it, but I'm going to. I mean, do I really have to go through the plot summary? I think most of you know what this movie's about. But I will say I like the Deadpool movies for the most part, but I still think the first one is the best, and because
Yeah,
it's actually a movie. I kind of feel like each sequel, you know, like how yearly there used to be these spoof movies that would basically take in every pop culture moment in the year and kind of either relive it or have a comment on it. No offense to Deadpool, but that's what this film felt like, the equivalent of, hey, I want to talk about all the superhero and Marvel movies that are out right now. So I'm going to tie a plot in here, but really, that's what this is all about. Like, this is like Ryan Reynolds' comedy special as Deadpool that comes along every few years. And there's nothing wrong with that because he makes it entertaining, you know, and makes it cinema worthy with things like, you know, having, oh, again, spoiler alert, like having see Channing Tatum as Gambit, and, you know, play up how ridiculous he kind of is, but also giving him a kick-ass action scene to be in. You know, giving justice to Jennifer Garner as Elektra. You know, that her solo movie obviously did not give her. Giving us finally Blade, and not only giving Wesley Snipes a line that seems prophetic as I'm the only Blade, because now Marvel's thinking about using him over Mahershala Ali, you know, and you know, obviously the cameo that was spoiled for both of us, Chris Evans, you know, as Johnny Storm, doing sadly his best cinematic work in years, you know. um, and I enjoyed the film. I mean, it's a little bit better than part two because there's more story that you care about. Because really, you would think Hugh Jackman in this, it's going to be just an insult all between the two of them, and it partly is. But I give it to Jackman. He brings the drama in
Yeah.
this, and I wish he would do this with so many more roles that we see him in. You know, I don't think it's the best directed. I think Sean Levy's he's an okay director. You can tell he started in television. you know, but he did what was called for, and I think this is his first rated R movie too. So I feel like a lot of these f bombs and just violence, he was just like, "Ooh, I've never gotten to do this before." so, but like I said, I didn't hate the movie. I think it was a wild ride, very entertaining. I enjoyed many aspects of it. Villain didn't really matter. I'm just like, I wish there had been maybe a cameo for Owen Wilson in there somewhere. Working for this time, basically the time cops. Um, I liked the little weird romance between even the black lady head of the time romance and Rob Delaney's character. I thought that was cute. Um, I guess the motivation for the movie was a little wild. Where it's like, oh, the people I care about, this core group of people, I have to save. It was just like, yeah, that just felt like kind of shoehorned in there. I love the opening scene with John Favreau. That
Yeah.
was inspired, other than him killing all those agents to buy, especially as a person who also enjoys old NSYNC music. Um, yeah, I definitely recommend it, but I don't feel like this is a movie I have to recommend. And nobody was like, but what does Jeff think? They were gonna go see it anyway. But Andre, what did you think of Deadpool and Wolverine?
Oh, I fucking loved it. Yeah, I agree with you. The first Deadpool was just so groundbreaking. I think that's just such a hard movie to top. But given how depressing Marvel's been lately for the past 2 years, this was a huge sigh of relief, at least for now. I mean, they got other movies that I'm not too crazy about coming out, but I thought this was a huge sigh of relief that not only did you have an R-rated Marvel film in the MCU, but that you have Deadpool teaming up with Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, that you had that moment where you saw like the montage of all the different Wolverine variants calling back to the comic books, whether it's the comic accurate 5'2" Wolverine or him in the classic brown and yellow suit, him fighting the Hulk. Even the Henry Cavill. I wasn't crazy about the Henry Cavill thing, although I liked the joke about, oh yeah, we're gonna treat you better than those pieces of shit down the street. So I love that. The Blade cameo was definitely not expected for me. I know he was rumored, but then to physically see it, I was like, yeah, holy shit. If they do decide to stick with him, it should just be one movie and that's it. Because I mean, Wesley's in his 60s. I don't think they would keep him around for the long term, but it definitely tells you that Marshall Lee's in some trouble unless some miracle happens before the end of this year. But that'll be another thing we'll talk about when the time comes. I like the villain Cassandra Nova, the sister of Professor X. That was like the toughest villain that they've ever had to face in the Deadpool movies, and she brought something to it that I thought really made it interesting and added to, I guess, the tragic story of Wolverine. And while I was a little disappointed there weren't other X-Men cameos, because I know there were like rumors of James Marsden and others maybe showing up and having comic accurate costumes. I'm kind of also glad they didn't do that, because then it would have just been overstuffed. But I did like that they brought back X-23, Daphne Keene coming back from Logan. So tying that back in, and also establishing the fact that this is not the same Wolverine from the Logan movie. So while they poke fun with his remains being used in the title sequence to fight off the TVA, they still tried to respect that movie to say no, this is a completely different Wolverine variant, and just left it at that. So it was heartwarming at points. Dogpool was a winner all the way through. I kind of want a little more Dogpool. I'm not gonna lie, but I think it gave you just enough to satisfy the fan service, a decent story, not a great story, but decent enough to carry through the threads of the tale, and to ultimately have a setup for something bigger, likely Secret Wars, for them to come back, and maybe the potential of more X-Men coming in, and the potential maybe more Gambit, more Blade, and other characters in the future. The Chris Evans thing, which again got spoiled for me 2 minutes before I walked into the theater. So fuck the Hollywood Reporter. Yeah, that was awesome. And I knew he was going to be Human Torch. I mean, he wasn't going to be Captain America here. So I had a blast with it. Highly recommend it. I don't think it's going to save the MCU for now, but it definitely was a relief given the crap that we've had to sit through.
True. Also, guys who really enjoyed this movie, Daphne Keene is of age, but ew. Stop doing it.
No.
It's like, and I guess my favorite line was when they saw, I guess, Cassandra Nova's castle, and it's basically the body of Ant-Man. I like that line. Oh, Paul Rudd has finally aged. I thought that was hilarious. But yeah, like I said, I like the film for what it is. I never thought it would save the MCU, but I'll be like, but it gives you a lot of excitement of what's possible in the future. And I think that's what hopefully Marvel was kind of banking on. I'm like, at this point, maybe you should just have Ryan Reynolds instead of Kevin Feige.
That's what a lot of people are saying.
But I don't know if he really want that responsibility. I'm sure he's like, I'd like to do other things with my life and days.
Yeah, but, no, he doesn't need the responsibility, but maybe you would think it would motivate Feige to go and say, there's money in established characters and not have to constantly go to the bottom of the barrel with, mantle theory shit of like, oh, okay, we're done with Steve Rogers, so let's make Sam Wilson do the Captain America, or let's do the female version of this character or that character, and they're so vastly underwritten, but you're checking the box, so it's like you give yourself a pat on the back and screwing over the audience. Let's start making some money again, guys.
And maybe vetting your screenwriters so that they actually know comic book and character history instead of just being like, hey, we need you to come up with an idea for Ant-Man 3. Like, okay.
Well, not even that, just joke writers.
But don't forget, it also has to make sure it goes with whatever storyline they have going on in some other part of the Marvel universe, so that there's this serendipity. You can make it random sometimes so that it doesn't have to go, like, this storyline doesn't have to go with Doctor Strange over me. That can be its own shit. That's all I'm saying, because I feel like in the DC universe, that's also why we never really got another second Superman movie, because they were trying to figure out, how do we put this character in this movie with this person? But we also have to use an original character from their comic book,
Marvel reminds me of the TV show Welcome Back, Kotter, and I'll tell you why. Because when Welcome Back, Kotter first started, Gabe Kaplan and his writing team, they understood what it was like to go to a Brooklyn high school growing up and having all of these delinquent characters that were in and out of the classroom. So they wrote based on their experiences. When you got to the last season, that season when John Travolta was just in and out of the show because of his movie career, all those writers, including Gabe Kaplan, were replaced by variety show writers who wrote for like Milton Berle back in the day. And what do you think ended up happening when you got a bunch of variety show writers writing a show about high school kids in Brooklyn? You got a disaster that wound up getting canceled. That's the Marvel Cinematic Universe right now.
Well, see, I was never a big fan of Welcome Back. I remember when they first started airing it on like USA or Nick at Night. Wow, I finally get to see this show. And I was like, okay, I see,
Yeah.
why it was popular in its day. But, after you get used to it, I would say after season 2, it was like, okay, now somebody needs to put this show out of its misery.
Were
Because
the sweat hogs really that dangerous? Like,
not really, because they all seem so dumb. And you never saw them fight. So it's like, who are you dangerous to? And what was worse was that it became sort of like when a sitcom becomes too popular and the characters become victims of just one-liners. Like, say the catchphrase, fuck the plot, say that catchphrase. Epstein, what's the note from your mother say this week? Horseshack, do your annoying laugh. John Travolta, be beautiful and dumb when you had hair.
it's probably an alternate version where Epstein and the Lawrence Hilton Jacobs character, probably like when they were off school grounds, they were like the muggers from Death Wish, just mugging people with knives on the street.
Or so he could use his white voice and say, Mr. Captain. Like, this is really your role on the show. And then have the principal be just the old white guy who's not in it. But I will pitch Vinnie Barbarino as a teacher now taking Mr. Cotter's role for a sequel series for John Travolta to make his comeback so he can say motherfucker weird.
Produced by Quentin Tarantino.
Exactly. Well, no, even Tarantino's like, hell no, I got movie money.
Oh, he would be involved. Trust me, he would do it. He has the freaking board game for Welcome Back, Kotter.
He could play Mr. Whitman or a substitute teacher who comes there and has to be schooled in the right way, or do this as a crossover with Abbott Elementary if you want to.
Yeah, well, they should listen to us. Yeah, take that idea.
But either way, let's get back to the main before we went on this weird Cotter experience. So now you know how we feel about Deadpool and Wolverine and Welcome Back, Carter's television series. So that ends this episode of Unfinished Business Television. And as always, we have plenty of unfinished business to attend to. But I must ask, have you seen Strange Darling? If not, why not? Because it's fucking awesome. Andre, what film should the people go out and go see?
Have you seen the movie The Thomas Crown Affair, the original 1968 movie with Steve McQueen? If not, why not? Because it's fucking awesome.
Yeah, the remake with Pierce Brosnan not that bad either.
I fell asleep on the remake.
Oh, I like the remake a lot. But that will end our show for this episode. And until next time, we bid you adieu.
If you like this review, please be sure to like and hit subscribe to be alerted to new episodes in the future.